Zeke quickly said, "Mr. Wade, it's the peak hour now, the hardest time to get a taxi. Why don't I send you there if you don't mind?" Claire was curious and skeptical about this coincidence, but she was too desperate to say no to the generous offer. "Thank you so much for the lift, Mr. White. You're too welcome, it's my pleasure." Zeke hurriedly got out of the car and opened the door for them happily. Charlie simply rubbed his nose sheepishly without a word. He was well aware that Zeke had grabbed the best opportunity to flatter him, and coincidentally, he needed his help, so he didn't refuse the offer. The driver drove in front while Zeke sat in the front passenger seat and started a casual conversation with Charlie. On the way, Claire listened to their conversation while a puzzling sensation brewed inside her. Zeke White was one of the successful businessmen in Orris Hill that earned a much higher honor and reputation in the business circle as compared to Lady Wilson. Such a figure usually possessed a firm and stern temperament, and yet, inside the car, Claire could clearly feel that Zeke seemed to butter Charlie up, and it was so obvious that it was getting a little greasy. Then she peeked at Charlie and found that he remained natural with a stoic look, making the whole scene even more mysterious. Logically speaking, when ordinary people got to meet a prominent figure like Zeke White, they would be very humble and try their best to please him. Yet on the contrary, Charlie looked indifferent, and he didn't even seem to care about Zeke. What was more peculiar was that Zeke had given Charlie a villa worth more than $100 million. It was so bizarre and odd. On the other hand, Claire had long heard that Zeke was very much into metaphysics and very superstitious. He would pray, worship, and give offerings to the god of wealth at home on the 5th and 15th of each month. It just so happened that Charlie seemed to have familiarized himself with this kind of superstitious study, and that was probably why Zeke was so polite to Charlie. Nevertheless, she did not believe in these superstitions at all. 10 minutes later, the car parked at the entrance of Spikeworth Court. Again, Zeke swiftly got out of the car and opened the door for them. Claire quickly blurted a thank you and followed Charlie into the company. "Master Wade, I'll be here waiting for you," Zeke said from behind them. Charlie nodded to him and said, "Thank you for the lift, but you don't have to wait here. I don't know how long we will take." "It's okay. I don't have anything to do today anyway." Zeke bowed to him and continued, "The White family's business is not doing so well recently. It has got me really worried. I would like to find some time to consult with you." Charlie smiled and said, "You were born in the year of Rooster, weren't you? Your birth sign clashes with this year's Tai Sui, which is the main reason for your misfortune and disturbances. Buy some herbs such as mugwort, caltrops, atractalodes, and poria. Put them all into a bag and bath in the herb-infused water to treat eczema. After the eczema is gone, you won't be as unlucky as you are now. The eczema is caused by the blocked internal circulation that is not only affecting your body, but also your luck." Zeke was so shocked as he listened to Charlie's remark, his jaw almost dropping to the floor. Charlie turned and left after he had finished speaking. Zeke slowly regained his composure from the daze and mumbled, "Genius, Master Wade. You are a godlike genius. You even predicted eczema on my thigh. Even my wife doesn't know about it." He bowed respectfully to Charlie with a look of worship on his face as Charlie walked away. It looked as though he had made the best decision by buttering Charlie up. Zeke stood upright and snorted. "Huh, Graham Quinton, you were so damned lucky when you hopped on Master Wade's wagon, but so did I. I'll catch up to you with my own wagon and do better than you." Charlie walked into the lobby and sent Claire into the interview room. As Claire entered the interview room, she saw several candidates making a line for the interview, so she joined the queue. Charlie strolled around the hall to pass his time. As he glanced downstairs from the window, he shook his head with a bitter smile as he saw that Zeke was still waiting by the entrance. He couldn't help it if the White family insisted on worshiping him like a god. In the office. Sitting behind his desk with his legs on the table, George stared at his phone intensely as he flirted with several women on a dating app. Just then, his phone buzzed, and a text message popped up. George pursed his lips in annoyance. As he reluctantly opened the text message, he saw that it was the interview schedule from the HR department. He frowned as soon as he laid eyes on it with a tinge of shock, and then he sneered sarcastically, shaking his phone at the people sitting next to him. "Hey, guess who came to Spikeworth?" Sitting on the sofa with George were Jerry and Joanne, who were here to meet George in hopes of currying favor with him. Seductive enchantment radiated from Joanne's body as she sat with her leg crossed in a low-cut body-hugging skirt and her wavy long hair cascading down her shoulders. She checked her nails arrogantly and asked, "Who is it?" "Charlie Wade and Claire Wilson." George clicked his tongue in disdain and sneered, "Claire applied for a job here, that's weird." Jerry asked in a displeased tone, "Why are they here?" Joanne answered, "Last night I heard Claire say that she and Charlie were kicked out of the Wilson family. She must be looking for a new job since she can't stay at her family's company any longer." Jerry snorted. "George, last night that loser was so cocky and pompous, causing me and Joanne to be beaten up by those crooks. You must take revenge on our behalf." George replied contemptuously, "I've always found Charlie the loser very annoying and irritating, and now his wife wants to work here? Dream on." He stood up, spruced up his coat, and said flatly, "Just wait and see. I'll reject Claire's application and kick her out of here." Joanne and Jerry plastered a condescending smirk on their faces that said, "Keep on your pretentious act, losers." George walked out of his office and went directly to the conference room where the interview was being conducted. Meanwhile, in the conference room, 3 interviewers were talking to Claire right then. "Hi, Mr. Harris." The 3 interviewers stood up and bowed to George when he walked into the conference room. George put on a surprised look when he saw Claire and exclaimed, "Oh, hey, Claire, why are you here?" Claire was equally surprised. "Hi, George. Long time no see." George nodded with a smile. "Yes, it's been a while." Then he turned to the 3 interviewers and said, "You can go out now. I'll handle this interview." Mr. Harris, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why? Are you saying that I can't even conduct an interview?" "Okay, Mr. Harris." George Harris was the senior executive in the company. The interviewers didn't dare to disobey his order, so they quickly left the room. Claire was very puzzled at what had just happened. What was George trying to do? Did he want to accept her application under the counter since he knew her? "Claire, I came as soon as I heard that you were attending the interview today." George spoke as he eyed Claire coyly. She was so beautiful and elegant, and her body was so hot. She was so much better than those women on the dating app. It was a pity that she chose Charlie the loser as her husband. Claire didn't know that George was up to no good, and so she hurriedly said upon his politeness, "George, you are too welcome." George pasted on a pretentiously kind smile. Taking Claire's resume from the table, he flipped through it casually and said in a depressing tone, "Claire, I'm so sorry, but from what I see in your resume, your qualifications don't meet our requirements, regardless of skills or experience. You do not fit our demand." Then he sighed and continued, "Well, I'm sorry, Claire. You failed the interview. I suggest you try another company. Good luck." Claire was taken aback by his harsh rejection and hurriedly said, "But I've been working at the management department at the Wilson Group for so many years. I'm certain that my professionalism fits the criteria that your company has stated." George shook his head and said firmly, "Oh no, your so-called qualifications and experiences are simply because you are part of the Wilson family. Now that you've been kicked out of the family, you're fundamentally a nobody." "All right then." Claire looked down dejectedly, a layer of gloom hovering under her eyes. She finally knew George's intention of interrupting her interview. He was waging a personal vendetta against her. She was infuriated by George's unprofessionalism. Knowing full well that she didn't stand a chance of being accepted by Spikeworth Corps, she withdrew her smile and walked out of the room in distress. Behind her, George grinned triumphantly and muttered, "Don't you ever dream of getting into Spikeworth for as long as I'm here?" Charlie was in the lounge area waiting. He was a little surprised when he saw Claire walking out of the elevator with an aggrieved expression. He went to her swiftly and asked, "Darling, what's wrong? How was the interview? Not good?" Tears drenching her reddened eyes, Claire spilled out everything that had happened during the interview. Charlie was enraged and irritated after listening to her story. George was such a dick. He never dared to go after him with malicious attempts, but he dared to bully his wife? How dare he? Taking out his phone, his fingers danced around the virtual keyboard as he typed a message. "George Harris of Spikeworth is pretty powerful, huh? He dares to bully my wife. Mr. White, how are you going to solve it? He sent it directly to Zeke. Meanwhile, Zeke was waiting for Charlie in the lobby downstairs with his bodyguard. When he received the message, he stared blankly at it first, and soon, the expression on his face was replaced by an extremely shocked gape. Damn it! He was trying desperately to fawn on Charlie, and this George something had gone out of his way and offended Charlie's wife. He had a death wish, didn't he? Enraged, Zeke spoke to his assistant without hesitation. Gather all of Spikeworth's board of directors right now. Spikeworth Corp was a subsidiary company of the White family. Hence, Zeke's existence in the company was as majestic as the emperor. When the board of directors heard that Zeke White was here and wanted to see them, they hurriedly went over to greet him. As the head of the White family, no one dared to upset Zeke. If he disbanded Spikeworth for any reason at all of them would be jobless. George was not one of the directors, so he didn't know how much trouble he had caused. After driving Claire away, he returned to his office, sitting on his chair and smoking a cigar with a smug smile. After hearing that George had kicked Claire out, Jerry and Joanne were extremely thrilled. They surrounded him and praised him. Boss, all you need is one remark and Claire is kicked out of your company. You're so awesome. True that. George is a senior executive of Spikeworth. George, you are the most successful among us. Joanne and Jerry touted George in the hope that if they could be on good terms with him, they would at least be guaranteed a bright future, not to mention being rich and powerful. George said smugly, I've always found Charlie disgusting and irritating since college. Now that his wife wants to apply for Spikeworth, dream on. Joanne giggled. George, you should have taken a video just now. I want to see how sad Claire looked after being rejected. George laughed. Haha, she almost cried. Oh my God, it was so funny. Jerry quickly asked, What about Charlie? Did he come with her? I don't know. I didn't see him. George snorted coldly. If that loser dares to step foot here, I'll fucking break his leg. Joanne kept on flattering George. Wow, you're the best. Charlie seems so little and transparent compared to you. George laughed triumphantly. Just wait and see. When I join the board of directors, these people will look up and worship me. Jerry asked in surprise. George, are you going to be one of the directors? Almost, George said with a smug smile. It's under process. If everything goes smoothly, I'll be promoted in a few months. Wow, that is so great. Jerry gave him a thumbs up and exclaimed, George, please don't forget your buddy when you're the director. George nodded. Of course! Don't worry, I'll look out for you. In the middle of the conversation, there was a loud bang, and the door of George's office was kicked open violently. Who the fuck dares to kick my door? George was shocked by the sudden commotion. He was about to shout when he saw all the members of the board of directors standing at his door, bowing respectfully at a middle-aged man in a suit. He stared at them in a daze as he swallowed his curse. Zeke glared at George darkly and asked, Are you George Harris? In a trance, George nodded slowly. Yes, I am. Without any warning, Zeke marched forward and slapped him hard across the face. Fuck you! How dare you reject Miss Wilson's application, you idiot! Clutching his swollen face, George was stupefied. Who the hell are you? How dare you slap me? How dare I slap you? I'll kill you right now! Zeke kicked George to the floor, stomping on his head and growling, Do you know that Master Wade had ordered that I must let Miss Wilson pass her interview? And yet you ruined it, you fucking idiot! If I don't make you pay today, I'll write my name, Zeke White, backward. George trembled in shock and fear upon hearing the name Zeke White. He knew that he was in deep shit now. He was Zeke White, the owner of Spikeworth, and the head of the White family. The entire Spikeworth belonged to the White family, and he had literally upset the ultimate boss. What was going on? Mr. White, I really didn't know that there was such an arrangement. If I knew, I wouldn't dare to disobey you even if someone threatened me at gunpoint. Please, please forgive me. George could only plead desperately as Zeke stepped on him on the floor like a bloody dog. Meanwhile, Jerry and Joanne were even more terrified, not even daring to breathe. Wade, as in Charlie Wade? Him again? How did Charlie know Zeke, the successful businessman? He was just a deadbeat moocher. What they didn't know was that the big boss standing in front of them was Charlie's lapdog, who had tried his best to butter Charlie up. George Harris, from this point forward, you're fired. According to the employment contract, you've committed a major liability mistake and you have to compensate the company for $5 million. George was utterly stunned, as if he had been struck by lightning. $5 million. He wasn't worth that much money, even if he traded himself. He knelt on the floor and pleaded vigorously, "Please, Mr. White, please give me another chance. I'll apologize to Claire Wilson right now. Please, please don't fire me." Zeke sneered. "Apology? Who do you think you are?" Zeke kicked George away and announced, "Release the news. George Harris has offended Master Wade. Thus, the White family now blacklists him in all the industries. This piece of trash will end up on the streets and be miserable for the rest of his life." George collapsed to the floor, his eyes filled with despair and agony. The reason why he was promoted to a senior executive position at such a young age had a lot to do with the strict employment contract that he had signed on his own will. To strengthen the control of their employees, the Spikeworth Corps had issued a very demanding and biased employment contract which guaranteed a promotion after signing, but they would be fully bound by the company. The promotion was guaranteed, but they had to prove that they were worthwhile and work hard to be loyal to the company. If they failed their performance indicator or had disagreements, the company would file a huge claim against them. Many people were afraid to sign such a contract due to its harsh and stern terms and condition, but at that moment, George was a fresh graduate who was full of ego and strived to succeed. Hence, he had signed the contract decisively despite the somewhat unfair consequences. Indeed, he had been promoted immediately and the company appreciated him very much, but now the bitter consequences awaited. Kneeling on the floor, George trembled in disbelief and despair. He had invested all his life and dedication in Spikeworth Corps, but now, not only did the company want to sue him for $5 million, but Zeke White had announced that he had shunned him. How could he ever find a job again? If he had no job, he would have no income, and his life would be in big trouble in addition to the $5 million compensation. There would be no other possibility apart from going to jail. He grabbed Zeke's foot and wailed desperately, "Mr. White, please, please forgive me. Please give me another chance. Please. If you blacklist me, where would I find the money to pay the compensation? Please give me one more chance to prove myself. I'll do anything for you. I'll be the slave of the company. I'll behave and be an honest man, contributing my entire effort to the company. Please!" Zeke kicked him away in annoyance and growled, "What's the use of apologizing now? It's too late. Do you think the world revolves around you? Do you think that after all this trouble you can just get away with a simple 'I'm sorry'? It's too late, idiot. If Master Wade ignores me because of you, I'll kill you with my own hands." George was shaking with fright, his face as pale and ghastly as a ghost. He had never expected that Charlie, a deadbeat loser in his eyes, had such enormous influence and power in his hands to the point that Zeke would kill him for him. If he knew that this was how he would end up, he would have rather knelt before Claire when they had first met, rather than reject her. Alas, it was too late now. He was done. At this moment, Zeke noticed Joanne and Jerry in the office and asked with an irritated frown, "Who are you? Are you his friends or Spikeworth's employees?" Joanne and Jerry were utterly surprised, and they quickly said, "Oh, no, we don't have anything to do with George. We don't even know him." How could they admit that they knew him at a crucial moment like this? It was best to cut their ties with him. Zeke asked suspiciously, "Really? Then why were you in his office, chatting and laughing?" George said furiously, "Mr. White, they are my college mates. Failing Claire Wilson's interview was their idea. It was they who provoked me to reject Claire." George glared at them indignantly. Jerry and Joanne were the main culprits of his misery. They would not get away with this. Zeke squinted at them in annoyance. "Oh, so it's a dogfight, huh? Blacklist these two as well." Jerry was in jitters. He jumped on George like a madman and started punching him. "George Harris, you bastard! How dare you drag me down with you? I'll kill you!" Meanwhile, Charlie and Claire had taken a taxi and were on their way home. Claire was unusually quiet and deep in her thoughts. Charlie took her hand and said, "You can always find another job. It's their loss for not hiring you. In fact, from what I see, the company is too small for your future development anyway. I doubt they can provide a suitable platform for you to outshine yourself." Claire sighed heavily and said, "It's hard to get a job now. I can only keep looking and see where my luck brings me. How about M Grand? Claire shook her head. Are you kidding? M Grand is not a supermarket. I can't come and go as I please. Besides, they have a very strict employee evaluation and grading system. It would be awkward and embarrassing for me to start from the bottom. Charlie heaved a sigh and said in a suggestive tone, Dear, I think that maybe you should start your own business. Start my own business? Claire asked in surprise. But how? Well, you've been in this industry for many years. I bet you have your own professional network and connections now. I see that Doris Young of the M Grand Group seems to be very fond of you. Moreover, Zeke White is counting on me to observe and manipulate his luck. I think he will be very supportive. Claire chuckled in a self-mocking way and said, Dear, we have to have at least $2 to $3 million in capital to start a business, and we need to pump more subsequent funds into the company to keep it up and running. Where and how would we get that much money? I'll help you in terms of the funding matter. I know some people that are quite generous. Charlie smiled warmly and continued, If you are serious, money is not a problem. Claire lifted her gaze and said, Charlie, I know you have a lot of friends who venture in the entrepreneurship industry such as Mr. Quinton, and you won't have any problem borrowing the money, but honestly speaking, it will be quite stressful if our business's capital fund is a loan instead of our own money. I might as well open my own personal studio with less capital funds and get the designing projects from the major construction companies. Charlie replied firmly, No matter what you decide to do, I'll be there for you as always. Claire nodded gratefully and said, I want to start the studio first and then work my way up. The Wilson family members thought that I couldn't do anything without the Wilson Group. I want to prove to them that I can. Charlie pondered her words before he nodded with a gentle smile. You have my full support, but you must promise to share all the problems you encounter at work with me. We'll solve them together. In fact, you can hire me as a free-of-charge employee. Your husband is not very skillful, but he can certainly drive and carry your bag. All right. Claire nodded, slightly touched by his notion. She was actually taking a big risk in making such a decision. If she didn't go to work, her family's biggest source of income would be cut off. Even if she opened a design studio, she needed to rent an office, buy office equipment, and so on. All of it required a certain amount of capital funds. Moreover, the Wilson Group had a lot of business projects with major construction companies in Oris Hill. They would probably shun her from potential clients, openly or discreetly. However, as Charlie was supporting her solidly without any hesitation, she felt a tinge of warmth and passion floating in her heart. Just when she was still in that complex mood, Charlie spoke. Dear, go ahead and do whatever you want. If things don't work out as you plan, I'll find a job to support you. Hearing his remark, Claire held her breath and felt a soreness rush to her nose, and her eyes were reddened with tears. When she was in such a desperate and depressing situation, her husband, whom she felt was worthless, still firmly believed in her and supported her. Because of Charlie's instigation and encouragement, Claire spent the whole night tossing and turning, thinking about her business. She looked rather exhausted and fatigued the next morning due to the lack of sleep. After waking up, Claire hurriedly freshened herself up. Charlie frowned at the sight and asked, Dear, why don't you sleep in? What's the hurry? I'm going to Millennium Enterprise. I must not be late. Millennium Enterprise? Another interview? No. Claire shook her head and said gingerly after a short pause, I'm going to try to look for some projects for myself. Great, Charlie smiled happily. If you start a construction company, I'll be your first employee. Do you think that starting a construction company is like making dinner? Funds and connections are the main criteria for the business to strive and survive, Claire said. I want to start from a small office and draw design drawings for the construction company. When I've built a significant network for myself and generated enough capital funds, I'll register the company. Charlie chuckled. Money and connections are not a problem. I can help you start a company right now if you want. No, thanks. Claire rejected his kind offer without thinking, and then said seriously, I want to try it myself first. Besides, what kind of resources could you possibly have anyway? Starting a construction company is not a child's play. I'm serious. I have the money to start a company as well as business connections. Right now, the M Grand Group's investment covers almost 70% of Oris Hill's businesses. It was a piece of cake to get some designing projects from construction companies. Claire assumed that he was just joking, and so she waved her hand reluctantly and said, "You don't know anything about the construction industry. I'll think about the investment, just leave it to me." To register a construction company, she needed at least $10 million as startup capital and a significant amount of circulating capital. Where would Charlie get that amount of money? Even if he did have the money, it was impossible for him to have connections in the construction industry. Charlie was utterly speechless. His wife would rather start from scratch rather than utilize the readily available resources that were himself. He didn't know what else to say to her. Claire had just only left the house when Elaine, her mother, returned. She relied heavily on the Wilson Group for her pension, so she had often visited the Wilson Group over the past 2 days. Although Claire had cut her ties with the Wilson family, Elaine didn't seem to share the same sentiment. On the contrary, she wanted to reconcile with them. Where did Claire go? She went to look for freelancing projects. What freelancing project? Do you really want to leave the Wilson family? Elaine huffed in irritation. It was just a tiny misunderstanding. Why do you want to make a fuss out of it and cut ties with them? We've become the laughingstock in the city. Jacob stared at Elaine in disbelief and bewilderment. Darling, what did Lady Wilson do to you when you were there? Did you knock your head against the wall after all the scolding? Are you out of your mind? What? No, I didn't lose my senses, mind you. Elaine threw herself onto the sofa as she growled. Tomorrow, go to the Wilson family villa with me and apologize to Lady Wilson. She is your mother, and Chris is your brother. Blood is thicker than water. How could you cut ties just like that? Jacob glared at her and said in a slightly furious tone, They wanted to sell my house and they wanted to rob Charlie's villa. They have never regarded me as part of the Wilson family ever. If you want to apologize, you can go alone. I won't step into their house ever again. Elaine grew angrier when Jacob, who was always so kind and mild-tempered, became so stubborn and firm. She turned to Charlie and said, Charlie, your dad is an old, stubborn dog. You be the judge. They are mother and son. They are brothers. Family quarrels are soon mended. Don't you think it's a little too childish and trifling to sever ties just like that? Besides, I need to count on the Wilson Group for my pension. See? She's crazy. They want to seize my property and rob Charlie's villa. They even want Claire to divorce Charlie and marry another man. Don't you see how insane they are? Jacob stood up and shouted indignantly. Did they hypnotize you or something when you were there? How could you simply believe everything they said? Charlie's head was tingling in pain as he stood in the middle of the feud. Thus, he quickly blurted out an excuse to get out of the miserable situation. Claire asked me to pick her up. I have to go now. Charlie quickly slipped out of the house while the quarrel was still going strong inside the house. It would be best for him to stay out of the annoying domestic disputes. Charlie went into a small cafe, ordered some snacks, and decided to spend his leisure time there until the evening. It was a famous gourmet street in Oros Hill with people bustling around. Charlie was enjoying his meal when he suddenly spotted 2 figures on the opposite side of the street, one of them looking extraordinarily familiar. That was Claire, wasn't it? Across the street was a very lavish restaurant. Charlie saw Claire sitting by the huge window on the 2nd floor, and opposite her was a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes wearing gold-framed glasses. Claire was holding a folder and talking to the man non-stop, as if she was showing her portfolio and her new role as a freelance designer, and hoped that the man would invest in her new establishment. Despite her enthusiasm, the man didn't seem to pay any attention to her speech. He even attempted to touch Claire's hand by taking the folder from her, which she quickly pulled away before he succeeded. Charlie's blood was boiling upon witnessing this ridiculous scene. That bastard! How dare he try to sexually assault his wife? Just then, the waiter came over with a plate of chips. Before he could put it down, Charlie slammed a $20 note on the table and got to his feet hastily. Keep the change! On the 2nd floor lounge of Little Italy, suppressing the disgust surging inside her, Claire plastered on a polite smile and said to the man across the table, Mr. Murray, I've compiled all of my company's future plans and prospects in this folder that will promise a positive development in the future. If you are willing to work with me, I promise you, I'll give you the best project planning. Miss Wilson, I know your abilities and I believe in you. Then the man showed a stiff smile. However, we have invested a lot of money into various projects recently, and our capital is quite restricted for the moment. Claire was a little disappointed. She had spent the whole morning presenting her portfolio to him, but he had been giving ambiguous and vague answers that confused her. Looking at Claire's disappointed expression, the man rubbed his hands deliberately and said, "Actually, it's not a dead end yet. Let me talk to the senior executives first. Frankly speaking, your portfolio looks very interesting. How about we continue the discussion at 8 tonight? I would love to know more about your work." Mr. Murray, that's quite late. Claire hesitated. It was quite late for them to meet at 8 p.m. Besides, if they went on with the discussion, they might end up talking until midnight. It wouldn't be nice for her reputation as someone's wife. The man smiled. "No, it's not. Investment is a big deal. We need to have a deep understanding of each other before we can build mutual trust, am I right? I'll treat you to a nice dinner tonight and we'll continue with the discussion. Come, Miss Wilson, let's shake hands for our future collaboration." The man extended his arm toward Claire's tiny little hand, a faint, flirtatious vibe hovering in his eyes. The man's name was Peter Murray. He had long heard about Claire Wilson, the woman who had won the title of Orris Hill's most beautiful lady, but he hadn't had any luck meeting her in the past. Yet now, Claire had contacted her personally, saying that she had broken her ties from the Wilson family and wanted to persuade him to invest in her new studio. He was over the moon. He planned to sweep Claire off her feet and enjoy the night together. Claire didn't want to shake Peter's hand, but since he had offered it, it would be rude to refuse him. Thus, she pursed her lips and extended her hand reluctantly. Just as Peter was silently thrilled and was about to grab Claire's fair hand, suddenly, a large hand came out of nowhere and grabbed his hand firmly. Peter was stunned for a moment. Looking up angrily, he growled, "What the hell? Who are you?" Claire lifted her gaze as well and was a little dazed at what she saw. "Charlie, when did you come?" She then quickly turned to Peter and explained, "He is my husband." Peter's face turned gloomy, as if a dark cloud hovered above his head when he heard the word husband. "I just arrived." Charlie smiled at Claire and then turned to Peter, pretending not to see the change of his expression, and then said, "You are Peter Murray, aren't you? The boss of Millennium Enterprise?" Peter said in a sullen tone, "Yes, that's me. So what?" "Nothing. It's just that you're quite a lecherous, dirty old man." Charlie nodded and intentionally lengthened his tone. Agitated, Peter tried to withdraw his hand, but Charlie grabbed onto him like a pair of iron tongs that made it impossible for him to break free. Peter hissed as his palm hurt more and more, and he felt as though his bones were about to break. "Hey, let go of my hand! It's very painful!" Claire knew that Charlie was very strong, and so she urged, "Charlie, let go." Charlie finally released his grip and glanced at Peter with an ambiguous smile. Peter's face was twisted in a painful grimace. He glared at Charlie angrily before turning to Claire and saying, "Tell your husband to go home. I'm not used to discussing business matters in front of outsiders." Claire paused for a short moment and said, "Charlie is my husband. He knows about my plan. He's not an outsider." "But still, I'm not used to talking about such an important agenda in front of a third party." Peter glared at him, wanting him to disappear right then and there. "Besides, he wouldn't understand what we're talking about anyway." Claire whispered to Charlie softly, "Why don't you go home first? I'm here for official business." "It's okay, I'll wait," Charlie said and sat down next to Claire. Peter grit his teeth in fury as he watched Charlie sitting close to Claire, his arm rubbing against her delicate body. He was very frustrated that he had almost gotten his hands on Claire but failed. He snorted in dismay. "You're the live-in son-in-law of the Wilson family, aren't you? Do you know how infamous you are in Orris Hill? Claire is working hard to support the family. We're discussing our potential collaboration. Please don't be a bother and get out of our way." Peter's tone was very rude and direct because he had no respect for Charlie whatsoever, and he wanted to send him away as soon as possible. Most of the people in the social circle knew about the deadbeat son-in-law of the Wilson family. Peter lamented that a magnificent beauty like Claire was married to a moocher. Charlie, on the other hand, frowned at the annoying tone and glanced at Peter coldly. "Claire? Were they on the first-name basis now? She was not your wife, bastard." Peter stared at Charlie in disdain and said, "Charlie, if you are a man, don't bother Claire. Can you help her? Do you have the money for her company? Can you get her a contract for architectural drawings? If you can't, I suggest that you go and get a job. You can be a delivery man or even a security guard. Don't stay at home all day long and be suspicious of your wife like a miserable loser husband." Claire was in jitters as she listened to their banter and interjected, "Mr. Murray, Charlie helps out a lot at home. Also, please call me Miss Wilson. Calling me by my first name sounds very unprofessional." "What does he do at home anyway? Go to the market? Cooking? Laundry?" Peter laughed sarcastically. "Claire, if your husband has a hard time finding a job, my company happens to be recruiting security now. You can let him try." Then he continued with a mocking grin. "Claire, if I were you, I would not have married a man who doesn't even have a secure job. I would have divorced this loser a long time ago." Claire frowned in dismay, but before she could speak, she felt an abrupt chill coming from beside her. She turned around and saw Charlie stand up with a smile on his face as he said to Peter, "Mr. Murray, your reputation precedes you. Now that I finally have the honor of meeting you, indeed, your personality matches your reputation perfectly. I also have something to say to you, Mr. Murray." Peter's lips curled downward into a frown. "What is it?" He bet that Charlie the loser would not dare to do anything to him. Charlie put his hands on the table, leaned forward slightly, and said with a sly smile, "What I want to say is, being a person, you can be useless or incompetent, but you must have a moral standard. Because if you don't, you're not a human, but an animal." He then held the mushroom soup that had just been served with both hands and poured it over Peter's head, his face blank and emotionless. Peter wailed in pain and jumped up abruptly as the hot soup scalded his head and face. Claire was utterly shocked by the commotion. She quickly composed herself and called the waiter to bring napkins. The steaming hot soup had scalded Peter's face, and it ran down his neck and into his clothes. The sticky soup drenched his head and clothes, and there was even a piece of mushroom sticking to his glasses. Peter wailed continually in agony and pain. The manager rushed over with a few waiters and was stunned by the scene. He quickly ushered the waiters to help clean up the mess. Peter took off his glasses and pointed to Charlie, yelling, "What the fuck?" Then he took out his phone and made a call. "Hey, Willie, get some guys and come to Little Italy right now. I need to teach a poor bugger a lesson." Upon hearing him make the phone call, Claire quickly apologized to Peter. "Mr. Murray, I'm so sorry. My husband was a little agitated just now." "Stop your bullshit. He splashed me with soup. I'm going to make him kneel in front of me today." Peter huffed angrily. Claire hurriedly turned around and said to Charlie, "Hey, go out first. Let me explain this to Mr. Murray." "Forget about him. Let's go." Charlie extended his hand and tried to take Claire's hand. Instead, she frowned in dismay and pushed him away, saying in annoyance, "Mr. Murray is the boss of Millennium Enterprise. He is very influential in the construction industry in Oris Hill. He knows people, legal, and even the underworld. Never mind that I can't get his investment, but there are some things that you can't solve with just your strength." "It's just a small company. I don't give a damn." "A small company?" Claire rolled her eyes, exasperated. In the civil engineering industry of Oris Hill, Millennium Enterprise was ranked in the top 5. Its scale was much bigger than the Wilson Group. Afraid that Charlie might offend Mr. Murray further, her face was icy as she said, "Charlie, leave this to me. Go out and wait for me outside.